Kia ora everyone, welcome back to our next edition of Econ Talks. Gareth, we've still been watching the vaccine rollout across the country. It had slowed down for a considerable period. We were having those first doses getting back very much to the very small numbers really that we were seeing before the Delta outbreak emerged. Rising risks in a sense that we were seeing that vaccination level rate start to plateau around that sort of 80% mark. Again, remembering that the modelling that the government has commissioned suggested at that level we were still going to see 7,000 odd deaths a year, possibly 60,000 hospitalisations. And so the concern, I guess, has very much been around what we're doing in that vaccination space, how we get more people out and about and getting the jab. Of course, important to see that the government is taking some recommendations. I think I might have mentioned a few sausage sizzles the other day, and lo and behold, a day later, Prime Minister is out in the Eastern North Island making sure that people are participating and getting a bit of food at the same time. We are going to need to see more of that to ensure that we do get our vaccination rates up, that we're starting to really push into those areas, and we're getting parts of the country that are currently with very low vaccination rates over the line. We know that in parts there is very much still that vaccine hesitancy and similar, but we also know that sometimes it does appear that access issues are still limiting some communities. We've recently seen detailed data from the Ministry of Health showing a suburb by suburb breakdown, and there are some rather sobering numbers in that in terms of who might or might not be covered. All of this really does start to pose a bit of a risk, though, to our economic fortunes. We've had the Reserve Bank highlight that the higher the vaccination rate, the better economic outcomes will be, or at least the least disrupted they will be. The government as well, Gareth, recently starting to signal that a bit of a shift might be coming in terms of our response to COVID, and importantly what that means to our economic fortunes. If we do start to move away from our current COVID systems, if we start to have to think about living with it or coping with COVID-19 in a different way, what is the risk there to our economic outlook?
Yeah, I guess firstly it's that transitional phase, like you say, until we get the vaccine numbers further up, and the government's talked about a target of 90%, then that reluctance to move away from lockdowns is going to cause issues for those parts of the country that are affected. We know at the moment that obviously Auckland, which is about 35% of the nationwide economy, still stuck at pretty much level 3. You're allowed to go and have a picnic, but not much more than that. And so that's still heavily constraining economic activity. We've been revising down our estimates of GDP for the December quarter as a result of that. We've now had parts of the Waikato added in to the sort of Auckland level 3 lockdown as well, with the virus spreading. And it'll be interesting to see over coming days and weeks whether you do start to see restrictions just rolling out across other parts of the country until you get those vaccine numbers up, and that does speak to sort of I guess issues in terms of overall economic activity, but more particularly, I think the businesses that are really heavily impacted by that, the ones that simply can't operate. You've got your hospitality, your restaurants and bars and that type of thing. You've got events as well, with numbers heavily constrained there until we get the vaccine passport and vaccination rates up. So those sectors in particular very heavily hit, and I think we're seeing increasingly stories coming through and anecdotes that there are more business failures occurring there, more businesses shutting up because they don't have the cash flow to survive through this. And there's no end in sight for some of those businesses as to when the lockdown conditions might ease. I mean, the government's roadmap announced this week, the closest we got to any sort of clear signals of what that might look like was 4 to 8 weeks, which I think was almost inadvertently a time frame put out there by Ashley Bloomfield, and I don't know whether there was any official approval on that, but that's the sort of thinking we're looking at through until possibly December and getting towards Christmas, before maybe life really does return to normal. So there is a real push around those vaccine numbers, and a risk that if we do start to see COVID or continuing to spread outside of Auckland and into other regions, you feel like the government's not going to be able to get on top of it, the contact tracing, that type of thing, because this Delta variant is very contagious and moves very quickly, and that really does sort of weigh on just how much economic activity might happen over the next maybe 3, maybe 6 months. Who knows? We have sort of dallied a bit in terms of that vaccine rollout and been behind where other countries have been, and it might be now that that is starting to catch up with us in terms of some of the outcomes we could see.
Absolutely. And look, the challenge still remains that COVID is not over, and everyone who talks about an end in sight, I think, is as being rather optimistic. We've got nearly to the end of 2021 now, and we're still, and had another level 4 lockdown, and looking like we might well have level 3 for a continued period. And let's just remember, level 3 still means an 11% reduction in general economic activity. That's a significant amount. That's a lot of people that aren't able to operate. It's a lot of GDP that you're having to cut off all the time. And the difficulty, I guess, we're having at the moment is that more and more areas are coming to the realisation, really, across New Zealand, that they could well go back into level 3 for an extended period, because we are seeing it spread. We've had it spread into the Waikato. We might have had it spread up into Northland. The expectation is that it could well be finding itself into all parts. And that's where the planning has moved, right? New Zealand has moved away officially from wanting or feeling like we're able to get back to zero COVID. And now from civic leaders, we are hearing that the feeling is a question of when, not if, COVID starts to spread in the community locally. But given the vaccination rates we currently have, we don't have that protection that we need, and that has and is going to require higher restrictions. The risk there is very much that we do have possibly economic activity hovering at a lower level. Now, to be fair, I think we've got to make the case as well that the economy does still remain on aggregate in a strong position. There's still that activity that's flowing forward. There has still been a rebound. But the concern at the moment is that we might well be sort of artificially pushing down on the economy, keeping it below its normal speed limit for at least until possibly around that Christmas period. And then with the vaccine passport ideas and similar rolling out, there's still confusion of exactly what that might mean for economic activity. Just as critically, let's remember that we are starting to see more and more studies about the efficacy of the vaccine over time. And there is, I think, in my mind, some definite risk that, again, we might approach a similar position to where we find ourselves now in 6 months' time as we start to think about booster shots or similar. What remains clear is that ability for the economy to keep moving forward is still very much there, and the optimism from businesses remains, but it does seem like we are going to artificially keep a cap on activity, probably for longer than even we were expecting at this point, even a few weeks ago. The feeling was very much that the Delta lockdown hopefully would work again, would be short, sharp and sweet in terms of getting rid of COVID and moving it through, but we're simply not seeing it. I mean, for our general economic thinking, okay, so we keep things a bit lower for the next few months. What does that mean for our longer term projections? Are we having to pull back activity on the whole, or are we still expecting a general rebound and recovery once we can get outside of these Delta issues? Or are we just at the risk that these issues, these restrictions, are actually become a bit more ingrained in society?
Yeah, I think that latter point is an important one that you make there, because at the moment, I think what is the concern over the next couple of months is that the longer this drags on, the more uncertainty hangs both over businesses and individuals, consumers, in terms of any planning that they're trying to do. So do you want to commit to big investment decisions? Do you want to go and try and plan a holiday somewhere if you're not sure whether that's going to be able to go ahead? And so that I think wears down people over time, and they become less willing to sort of make those plans, take those risks. So, if we are hanging around in this spot for a while, I think it does weigh on growth. Further out, you raise the question about what does New Zealand's sort of potential growth might look like. The concern I have is that the more sort of fiscal support that we need to provide for the economy now, the more borrowing that needs to go on from the government. It means there's that much less scope for fiscal stimulus or fiscal policy, fiscal spending 5 years down the track, because they brought a whole lot of that spending forward just to try and fill in the hole in people's incomes, people's revenue through the lockdowns and the uncertainty that we've got. So, yeah, it's not a free lunch. There's no, just because we've locked down at level 3 and there's 12% of the economy not operating, that is still going to cause medium-term issues for the economy. And I would be concerned about both household debt levels, government debt levels, and just what that means about the potential for growth 3 or 5 years down the track.
Absolutely, and I think what's clear, right, is that COVID-19 is not finished. This pandemic is continuing to roll out across the world. There will be more hurdles that we have to face. We're going to have to continue to exist in this more uncertain situation than we've seen for a long time. Very much something that we're going to have to continually praise and understand how it's evolving. Key for me at the moment is that our vaccination levels are going to be important, going to be absolutely critical for the reopening of the economy. more people vaccinated is good for our healthcare system, it's good for society, and at the end of the day, it's critically important for our economic prospects as well. So the more people that get vaccinated, the better. If you're out there and you haven't already, for goodness sake, please go and do it. It's important for you, your family, your community, for New Zealand as a whole. Let's get vaccinated and let's move ahead. We'll assess where we're going with the vaccinations and how that's going to affect the economy again on one of our future editions of Econ Talks.